The amen break. Here's what it sounds like. The amen break. I'd like to talk about drums.
True citizens of the cosmos,
about a particular drum
we have to do something that physics says is impossible.
I'm sure you've heard it dozens of times before.
We have to travel faster than a beam of
Here's
light.
what it sounds like.
Faster than a beam of light.
I'd like to talk about drums.
Faster than a beam of light.
wanted you to live, but now that I'm gone, I'm feeling like this could be real. I'm feeling like this could be real. I'm feeling like this could be real. Now that I'm gone, I'm feeling like this, feeling like this. Feeling like this, feeling like this. But now that I'm gone, I'm feeling like this, feeling like this. Feeling like this, feeling like this.
Hello and welcome to the SciPhi show. I'm Joe,
I'm Dave.
and tonight we're going to be discussing fallacies. And Opie's here as well in the chat room. How you doing, buddy? I hope you enjoyed that little pre-mix. I'm going to not have a mix during the actual show because I want to discuss what we're doing in more detail. So tonight we're going to be discussing fallacies. So it's going to be common fallacies that you hear thrown around all the time, and they're made by both theists and atheists and anyone of a different ontological position as well. We're not going to get into those tonight, but we are going to be discussing fallacies. So the first thing that we need to discuss is, well, what is a fallacy? And a fallacy is basically an error in reasoning. It doesn't necessarily make the conclusion false, but the reasoning to get to that conclusion is fallacious and needs to be refined. So tonight we're going to go through a number of different fallacies and, talk about how they are sometimes used incorrectly, and also when they're shouted incorrectly, because some things people do is actually go, oh, that's a fallacy, rather than address the argument. And actually, the person isn't actually committing a fallacy anyway.
Yeah, if you're going to accuse someone of making a fallacy, you've also got to be able to explain why it's a fallacy.
Exactly. So some of these statements might seem a little glib. So when I have done a little bit of prep writing these down as just some basic examples of things. So it's just trying to get to a concise example. If anyone out there wants any of these expanded on or explained further, then please shout out and we will do it. Hey, Opie. So the first one is one of the most common fallacies that you will hear out there. It's the ad populum fallacy. So the ad populum fallacy basically describes someone drawing a conclusion to be true based purely on the fact that lots of people believe it's true. So an example of a theist doing this might be saying, well, there's more people around the world that believe in a god, some form of god, than people that don't. Therefore, it must mean that there is something true to that. It must mean my god is real. And from the atheist point of view, you can get people saying, most atheists I speak to say atheism is only defined as a lack of belief in gods. Therefore, that is the only definition of atheism. Do you have any that you want to add to either of those, Dave?
No, not that I can think of. It's like quite a common thing, to be honest.
It is, and it's also quite commonly shouted out incorrectly. So, for example, if we think about consensus from academic professionals, obviously, maybe if you're basing your only reasoning on that, you could argue that it is slightly fallacious, but you've got to think about how these are professionals that spend a lot of time studying these topics. They know a hell of a lot more about them than us, and if they come to a consensus, so think about science and how vaccines and how, you know, the large portion of people agree that vaccines are generally safe. There are potentially some dangers to certain people if you've got a weakened immune system and you shouldn't take them, etc. But for example, that is one where we can trust that everything's done. In fact, peer review is basically that ad populum, if you want to go that way. It's a lot of people reviewing the work and trying to prove it false, and actually all going, well, actually, no, we haven't been able to, so therefore we're going to say that it's at least seems to be true. The same can be said for the historical method as well. A lot of people examine a number of different things throughout history, and they will, you know, have a look at all the things, and then you look at what they agree on between them, and you take this sort of consensus view on the topic. Things with history, you know, the further back you go, the harder it is to say what actually did happen. So you have to use as many sources as you can find and try and get a sort of consensus view. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Dave?
I think one of the important things to remember is when people say the consensus view is so and so, they're not saying it's right because it's the consensus. They're just saying that all these people with expertise in the matters all come to this consensus.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically saying this is most likely the case, especially with history. There is no real certainty there. As the further back you go, the less certain it is. It's saying, based on what we know, this seems to be the case. This is what is evidenced. This is how we feel it is. Obviously, it's a lot easier now with all the technology that we've got going on, and you consider you know, the social media and all the tracking on our phones and everything like that. We'll probably never have such a big issue with ancient history again, unless there's a virus that somehow wipes out all the data that we have around the world. But you know, going back that far, that's sort of how it works.
Just wait for COVID-20.
So the next fallacy that I'd like to cover off tonight is the straw man. It's, you know, you're making a straw argument basically. So you're making the argument that someone isn't actually making because it's more easily defeasible than the actual argument they're making. There's a few different examples we can give of this. Do you want to take this one away, Dave?
Well, yeah. Let's see. With the Christians, I suppose they could say, you're only attacking religion because you fear God. So it's basically setting up a practice dummy. Hence the straw man.
Yeah.
You're creating a practice dummy.
They could even be more general, couldn't they? They could even say, well, because you're an atheist, you believe this. And they instantly assume that you believe certain things just because you're an atheist.
Well, no, that's just false identification. In the case of a straw man, you have to actually be making an argument and attacking the argument, not just accusing somebody of being a particular way.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just talking like if someone was talking about, say, evolution, they might then start attacking the Big Bang or something like that sort of thing, or
Yeah,
or how life started, and you're like, no, we're not talking about how life started. We're talking about how life evolved.
yeah. Or saying evolution is dead because Darwinism has been proven wrong. Um, Evolution and Darwinism aren't the same thing, so you would be attacking a straw man.
Yeah. That, in fact, there is an article on the site that Alan wrote a few years back, The Evolution of Evolution, from Darwinism to modern synthesis, I think, where he explains that, Darwinian evolution isn't all we know about it. It was a great start. It was a point in the right direction. And that's one of the things with science. So that's a great example, actually, Dave. Yeah, if you're having a discussion about evolution and someone decides to attack Darwinism, that's not exactly the same thing. You're talking past each other. So flip it round. What's a common one that we might see from an atheist?
You only define atheism as the belief gods do not exist to make it easier to attack.
Yeah, fair. So in this one, the straw man fallacy is always a fallacy. There is no way around it. But there are times when people do shout it out incorrectly. For example, you might ask the question, "Do you mean X? Is this what you're talking about?" Just to try and clarify the position, and they might shout, "That's a straw man. That's not what I said." And you're like, "Well, I didn't say that's what you said. I'm trying to clarify what your position is." There also might be situations where they are talking about X, and if X is true, it would mean, say, Y is also true. So you discuss X and Y, and they go, "Well, I'm not talking about Y." You're like, "Okay, but X and Y are linked."
Yeah, if X entails Y, then it's valid to talk about Y.
Exactly.
It's not a straw man, yeah.
So the next one we're going to cover off is the appeal to ignorance, and excuse my Latin, but argumentum ad ignorantium. Is that any good, Dave? Did I get it right?
Argumentum.
So argumentum, yeah, isn't that what is
Argumentum.
Argumentum? Oh, okay. Caecilius es in atrium. That's all I remember from Latin.
That sounded very German.
Okay. Anyway. So the appeal to ignorance asserts that a proposition is true because it has not yet been proven false, or a proposition is false because it has not yet been proven true. So the common one for a theist would be, well, my God is real because you've not proved it false. And we flip it around for an atheist, your God is false because you've not proved it true. That one's quite easy. Do you have any other examples that pop to mind, Dave?
A really daft one, which is also kind of a straw man, is evolution can't be proven true because there's no missing links or no transitional fossils.
Yeah, yeah. And on that one, everything's transitional.
But yeah.
We'll not get into
Hence why it's also kind of a straw man.
Yes.
But it's also an argument from ignorance because you don't understand it fully and you think that these things exist when they don't.
Yeah, fair. So next one is the false dilemma or false dichotomy. So it's a type of informal fallacy, more specifically one of correlative-based fallacies, where a statement falsely claims an either-or situation when in fact there is at least one other logically valid option. So we could even say that you could even tie it in with like a no true Scotsman in a way. For example, a theist, I saw this one actually, a theist was accused of not being a Christian because they didn't vote Republican.
Okay.
Yeah, they were given an either or. You either vote Republican or you're not Christian. They were the two options again. So that's a false dichotomy in itself, and it's also a no true Scotsman. There's also a very, very common one that you hear among the atheist community online. It's you can only be a theist or an atheist. There is no middle ground.
Yeah. But there obviously is.
Yeah, there's a number of different ontological positions. I mean, we've got articles on the site. We probably will do an episode on this in the future. However, we're not going to cover it off right now.
Or you're either a penguin or a baby in a tuxedo.
Yeah. So there are times when it's not a fallacy, and that is when there's a genuine dichotomy. For example, a normal light switch can only either be in an on or an off position. There are things that are genuinely binary, and people sometimes try to say that that's a false dichotomy, you know? Adam says you're either a theist or a rock. So next one up, we've got the slippery slope fallacy. So this is kind of how it sounds. It's a logical fallacy which a party asserts that a relatively small first step going a particular direction leads to a chain of events that culminates in a significant event. So a theist, especially if they're very, very right-leaning, will say, if we allow homosexuals to marry, then next it'll be allowing people to marry children, and then they're going to marry animals, and it'll be all hell will break loose, sort of thing. So with an atheist, see, this one's a bit of a harder one for me, but we could say things like, if you let Catholics babysit kids, it'll lead to lots of child molestation, because the Catholic Church enables that sort of thing. Which, I mean, there's only 2 points there, but that could be the same sort of thing. Have you got any that are probably better than that one that I could think of?
Well, there's jokey ones, like if you allow Arabic numerals in schools, you'll end up with girls wearing hijabs.
Yeah. There are, of course, times when these aren't fallacies, though, and that's when there's perfectly logical reasoning to back this up. So if you were to say to a child, you can choose whatever you want to eat for every meal for the next year, chances are they are going to choose the unhealthy options. They're going to eat fast foods, ice creams, chocolate, sweets. This will lead to them being incredibly overweight because they're eating lots of these sugar-rich foods, etc., and potentially a number of other health issues. So this might not be every child, and that's the part that you've got to be aware of. There are some kids that might be sensible and go, oh yes, well, I would like a chicken salad tonight, please. But in general, that is one of those things that you could say is a valid slippery slope, because that is the most likely thing to happen.
Sorry, I was responding to Opie.
Okay. So next up, we have the circular argument. So circular reasoning is a logical fallacy in which the reasoner begins with what they're trying to end with. So the components of a circular argument are often logically valid because if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. So the common one that you will hear from many Christians is that the Bible is flawless because it's the word of God, because it says so in the Bible, therefore it's flawless. You get similar claims about the Quran and all that sort of thing. I suppose with atheism, you often get people going, well, atheism is the more rational position and only rational people are atheists. Therefore, as an atheist, I am a rational person because I hold the more rational position, and therefore everything that I say is rational because atheism is the more rational position. It's sort of going round and round in that thing, instantly assuming just because you're an atheist, therefore you're rational, which is irrational in itself. So it's quite ironic as well.
Yeah.
So times when it's not a fallacy, there are certain tautologies that sort of just work, aren't there? Like certain theories of truth. The correspondence theory, it is quite circular when you actually look at how you describe it. So it's that is which in accordance with reality, and you go into reality and it speaks of facts, and facts speak about what's true, and it's just one of those things that just sort of works. It's not without problems, but it's not necessarily the same thing as a circular argument.
Yeah, that's it. It's not actually a circular argument. I mean, you could go with the stuff like God is the creator of the universe. If the universe exists, it's created. Therefore, God created the universe. That's a poorly put, but it's that kind of thing. You start with your conclusion in the opening premise, and then argue for that opening premise as the conclusion.
Yeah.
Even if it's worded slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see a lot of them going around. So yeah. So the the hasty generalization is the next one up, and that's a fallacy in which a conclusion is reached is not logically justified by sufficient or unbiased evidence. So a common one you might hear from theists is atheists are just rebelling against God because they don't want to be judged for their sins, or they hate God, or that sort of thing. And another one that you might get from atheists is all theists are too irrational and too stupid to understand science.
Yeah, and you hear that one quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So times when it's not a fallacy, though, if you're sort of using a soft generalization, I guess, in the sense that atheists tend to favor naturalism. Christians tend to go to church on a Sunday. You're still making a generalization there, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, you're actually sort of going off. You're not making an argument using that generalization. You're being descriptive.
Exactly. So next up, we got the red herring fallacy. So a red herring is something that misleads or distracts from a relevant or important question. It may be either a logical fallacy or a literary device that leads readers or audience towards a false conclusion. Do you want to take this one away?
Okay, it's generally I suppose you could consider it in a similar way to a slippery slope, except the slippery slope points away. Or a straw man could be considered similar. So evolution can't be true because you can't describe the origins of life. When evolution isn't meant to, it moves the conversation away from evolution then and into something like abiogenesis.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and from an atheist perspective.
Okay, see, the problem with doing it from the atheist perspective is there's no common arguments like that.
No, I guess there's not. I mean, there's ones that atheists make, but yeah.
And to be honest, I don't really get into that many discussions with them, so I don't really know the kind of arguments that they make. If they made better arguments, I might pay more attention to them.
We could always link back to, like we were discussing, or with Tim, about how it's quite common to say that there's no Roman writings contemporary to Jesus, so therefore he can't be based on a historical figure.
Yeah, that would work. And because there's not necessarily any reason to think that there would be Roman writings about him contemporary. If he was just a regular, average, rebellious preacher, he wouldn't make that much of a mark.
No, if he was just that apocalyptic preacher that you see on the streets, you probably wouldn't think much of him. And if he came
No.
a bit annoying, oh well, chucked in jail, crucified, done.
So yeah, it would be best to discuss the available material using the historical method rather than make demands that might not necessarily exist.
So with the red herring, it's one of those things that is always a fallacy, but there are times when it's miscalled. In the same way that a straw man is, there are times where if A is true, B follows, and someone might call you out as a red herring for addressing B. So the tu quoque fallacy is the next on the list.
Tu quoque.
Tu quoque. Oh, I've only ever read it.
Yeah, it's tu quoque.
Do you know, I think being dyslexic but also reading lots has led me to a lot of problems. When I was I used to play Warhammer as a kid, and I was about, I don't know, 9-10 years old or whatever, and it used to say on the side Citadel Miniatures, and for a year I thought it said Kittel Miniatures because I just so I do that a lot. So thank you for the correction. I do appreciate it. Tu quoque.
I think a lot of people get it wrong, to be honest.
Yeah. Now you know what it is. I've been corrected. You've been corrected too.
And the more you know.
The more you know. So, it's an appeal to hypocrisy, an informal fallacy that intends to discredit the opponent's argument by attacking the opponent's own personal behaviour as being inconsistent with the argument's conclusion. Basically, trying to answer a criticism with criticism.
Yeah, it's basically name calling.
Yeah. You could say a theist might go, well, I might have faith, but so do atheists. It takes more faith to believe in God than it does to not believe in God than it does to believe in God. That's quite a common one. And similarly for an atheist, it's, science may not have all the answers, but I believe in things. But to believe in things based on faith is never a path to truth.
Yeah, it's a lot of the time it's used in the political realm more than anything. My opponent can't solve crime because he's a socialist.
Yeah, which is a ridiculous statement in and of itself.
Yeah.
And that's one that's basically always a fallacy.
It's name calling.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever actually seen that one misused either, personally. But if anyone has, feel free to correct me. Next, we have the causal fallacy. It's a fallacy brought about by attributing a false cause during the argument. During reasoning, A is attributed to the cause for B when A is not related to B. Every time I go out, it rains. Therefore, me going out is going to cause it to rain. So we can see this one quite commonly with theists who will, anytime something good happens, it's because of God. So say they couldn't find their keys and they prayed to Allah, and then all of a sudden they remembered that they were in the kitchen, so Allah helps them find their keys. And for atheists, it's Catholic priests molest children after joining the church. Therefore, Catholic religion causes child molestation.
Yeah, any attribute to a false cause, really.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons it's bad is based on the principle of explosion. If you start with a false cause and a false conclusion or a false premise, then it will just expand and expand and expand, and everything that comes from it is most likely to be false. If it's true, you've just got lucky.
Next one's a bit of a favourite of mine. I think I included it in a few articles about a couple of arguments I've had. It's the genetic fallacy, also known as the fallacy of origins or fallacy of virtue. It's based solely on someone or something's history, origin, or source rather than its current meaning or context. So it's quite easy to explain both of these ones. So a theist could say, well, this site or this video is being run by atheists, so therefore their information must be wrong. And one that I've actually had pulled out on me by an atheist was, well, the Stanford University has religious roots, therefore everything on it is invalid.
Yeah. It's quite a common one. Like anything that comes out of the Bible must be false.
Yeah.
Because the Bible's a fairy tale book. That's quite a common one as well.
There's so many like that. And actually, the old adage, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah. Another one, I guess you could say, there's no truth in the Bible because it comes from goat herders. That's both an ad hominem and a kind of genetic fallacy.
Yeah. So, it can be argued that this one is actually always a fallacy as well. But you could potentially allow it if a particular source has persistently been debunked about a particular subject. Say it was an anti-vaxxer site that was constantly posting anti-vax information and false studies and all of that sort of thing. You would be slightly more rational maybe to assume that the next article that they post about vaccines is going to be again more nonsense, but even then that's still basically fallacious thought. You should still at least give it a skim and see if there is anything new in there before you go, oh, it's going to be bullshit, because you never know.
It's wrong because of the argument that they make rather than the source that it comes from.
Exactly. So, poisoning the well. So that's an informal fallacy where adverse information about the target is preemptively presented to an audience with the intention of discrediting or ridiculing something that the target person is about to say. I mean, in some regards, it's kind of like a genetic fallacy. You're trying to poison the well so other people will then instantly just assume that they're wrong and commit the genetic fallacy themselves. They're quite tightly linked. So again, we can have very similar examples where atheists can go, atheists cannot be trusted because they do not believe in God, and you need God to have morals. And atheists can be like, oh, well, theists believe in imaginary friends and therefore are completely irrational. Poisoning the well is always a fallacy. Don't do it.
Yeah. And it's quite a self-descriptive fallacy, really. It sort of describes exactly what it is.
Next up tonight, we have the etymological fallacy. So the etymological fallacy is a genetic fallacy that holds that the present-day meaning of a word or a phrase should necessarily be similar to its historical meaning. So this is a linguistic misconception and is sometimes used as a basis for linguistic prescription. This could also be extended into an argument from etymology in the sense that we use the etymology of the word to fully define it, often ignoring that the etymology is not the same as the word's use or definition. So what would you say would be one that you see a theist doing this from?
I actually don't know, to be honest.
I cannot actually say I've seen a theist make this particular argument. I could not think of anything. I'd spent about 4 days trying to think of one. But there are a couple of examples from the same person I can think of about from an atheist. And that is Aaron Ra going, I use the original definition of atheism, therefore it's the correct one, not to mention the fact that even in his own article that he proved it wasn't the original one, and even if it was the original one, it doesn't make it correct anyway. And then another one where he sort of uses the argument from etymology is he goes, the etymology of agnostic is without knowledge, therefore the only definition of agnostic is without knowledge. except that's not actually its use. That's not how it's coined. It's just one that's currently used on the internet with people that haven't spent much time looking into these things. But it is a definition.
Yeah, words just don't work like that.
Yeah, exactly. They have a number of different uses. They have common uses, and we have contextually correct or normative uses of particular terms. So we could actually say that the way theory is used in science or evolution is described in science, they have normative uses. So theory is, I'm not going to go into the full thing, but it's basically a description of something that's going on in the world, something natural. And if we think about evolution, it's not a change in kind. That is technically a valid definition if you're thinking in creationist circles, but actually they're speaking about something scientific. So the normative use of it is small changes over time till speciation occurs. Obviously, it's more technical than that, but I'm keeping it simple and light for the broadcast. And the same can be said for other terms like atheist and belief and knowledge and agnostic and all of that. You know, they have all of their colloquial uses, which are perfectly fine for people to use, but you are actually having a philosophical conversation whether you know it or not, and there are normative uses for these terms too. I think as well with this one, it's probably also always a fallacy in a way, unless you're trying to say that that shouldn't be the normative definition because I don't know. Yeah. So, guilt by association. Guilt by association fallacy occurs when someone connects an opponent to a demonized group of people or to a bad person in order to discredit his or her argument. The idea is that the person is guilty simply by being similar to this bad group, therefore should not be listened to about anything.
Don't listen to her, she's Antifa.
I think both theists and atheists are guilty of doing this to each other as well, aren't they? They both demonize each other and they spend so much time talking past each other instead of talking about the common grounds and where they agree on things. They spend so much time going, oh yeah, well, I'm not listening to you because you're a theist. Yeah, I'm not listening to you because you're an atheist. And again, it's always a fallacy. Next one's reductio ad absurdum. Did I say that one right?
Reductio ad absurdum, yeah.
Yeah. So in logic, this is also known as the argumentum ad absurdum as well. It's also known as an appeal to extremes. It's a form of argument that attempts to establish a claim by showing that the opposite scenario would lead to absurdity or contradiction. In some respects, it is kind of like a slippery slope fallacy, except it's not even going down the path. It's literally going, well, if this happens, then this will happen. Can you think of any particular examples that you see theists or atheists commonly making?
Nothing springing to mind at the moment.
No, I've seen them coming up, but they aren't ones that I have actually seen a common trend between either theists or atheists. They just do happen sometimes. But there's also times when it's not a fallacy. So it's when you're using it as a rhetoric to point out genuine flaws in someone's argument rather than reducing it to an absurd state to dismiss it. Basically, if someone says something absurd, then and they're making an argument, but they don't realize it is. You go, do you realize if what you say is true, then it means X, Y, Z? And that might seem completely ridiculous, but that's because the initial premise is ridiculous in the first place.
If an atheist is just something that does not hold a belief in God, then rocks are atheists.
So we're on to our last couple before we hit our little special. So we've got the G.I. Joe fallacy, which I think I first heard from you last year on one of our podcasts. And it's when the arguer believes that being in possession of knowledge about fallacies mean they do not commit fallacious reasoning. Their understanding of fallacies makes them immune to fallacious reasoning, which is fallacious reasoning in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it happen. I've seen people say, I study fallacies, so I don't commit them.
Yeah. And actually, I quite commonly hear that more from atheists than I do from theists, actually.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It's.
Generally, sorry, carry on.
I was going to say it's sort of a form of Dunning-Kruger, to be honest.
Yeah, fair, that makes sense. It's an overconfidence in the fact that, well, I study this, so I know everything about it. When
Yeah.
actually, yeah, good shout. And yeah, as we said, that one is generally made by atheists. I mean, you can pick up any example about that, you know. I've actually had one that was, we were having a discussion about beliefs and knowledge and definitions of atheism and stuff like that, and he first of all started shouting out fallacies that he thought I was making that I wasn't making. And I even said, actually, technically, if there was one fallacy you could call me out on is the fact that I was speaking anecdotally, but the pair of us are discussing anecdotes about what we experience, so we're not making an argument there, we're just discussing things. But if you want to, that's the closest I've come of making a fallacy. Nothing on that. I mean, just to say, like, we haven't covered every fallacy that there is in this list. I just wanted to go through common fallacies and how they are misused. And then yes, he then was going, no, I know it's a fallacy. I know what you're saying is a fallacy. Blah blah blah. It was okay. All right then.
Yeah, to be honest, I think a few years back it was very popular in atheist groups to just yell out fallacies, and it was like a trend, and everybody learnt the fallacy names from each other, but not necessarily what the fallacy was.
Yeah, it's almost like people were playing a game of fallacy bingo and
Yeah.
trying to get as many as they could. Yeah. It sort of leads us on to the next one, actually, which is the fallacy, where
Opie's favorite.
Yeah. Oh, then shout out to you, Opie. It's where the arguer claims that the argument contains fallacious reasoning, and therefore the conclusion of the argument is wrong. Now, as we said at the beginning, just because something has fallacious reasoning doesn't necessarily mean that the conclusion is false. And also, sometimes they might be calling out the fact that it's got fallacious reasoning erroneously. So, have you got any common examples of that one? Other than the ones I just mentioned, obviously.
Okay, I can't divide them into groups, but a common one is, you called me a moron. That's an ad hominem. No, that I'm just calling you a moron. I'm not saying your argument is wrong because you're a moron. You're just a moron.
That is actually a common misconception. Actually, we missed that one off of our list as well, didn't we? The ad hom.
We could do it now.
Yeah, go for it. You explain it. I'm just loading up this.
No worries. I mean, it's basically where rather than attacking the argument, you attack the person. So what would you know about morality? You're a Christian. Christians are immoral, so you're immoral. Or your argument is wrong because you're an idiot.
Not
you know,
an idiot, and also your argument is wrong.
Yeah, that would be a better way to put it. A lot of people misconstrue an insult for the ad hominem, but the ad hominem is specifically attacking the argument by insulting the person, hence the to the man.
Right, so that basically concludes our list of fallacies. There are obviously more. We were just doing a common list, and I can't believe that I actually missed out one of the most common ones that is thrown out erroneously, but thankfully we caught that at the end.
That's what I'm here for.
Sometimes no amount of preparation can protect you from
That's why I just wing everything.
So this bit is basically a little bit of fun. Through debates online, responses to our articles, and just general discussion, we've discovered some faulty arguments that, whilst might not actually fulfill the parameters of a formal fallacy, they do show faulty reasoning and conclusions, and they seem quite common. The first one actually got its name from Dave, because it was from a conversation that he was having, in fact the pair of us were having, and it's called the Oh Man. So the Oh Man, or appeal to free speech, is an error in reasoning that states that due to having free speech, you can define any word as you please, and no one can correct you, inclusive of ignoring contextually correct or normative definitions. This is often combined with a special plead in which you expect someone to accept your definitions without having to accept theirs.
Yeah, and there was also the I have free speech, so you don't get to tell me when I'm wrong or when my argument is wrong.
And the end result of when someone starts going down this path is, oh man.
Yeah.
Opie's saying, did we do the Mott and Bailey? No, we didn't.
No.
No. In fact, I don't think I've actually heard that one before. So anyway, I'll carry on with this. We'll come back to that one at the end. The next one is an Argumentum ex ignorantium populum. I made it up, obviously. It's a load of BS. It was just me typing loads of words into a translator trying to find out what makes it. Another definite way of saying it is the vulgaris argumentum ex ignorantia, or the argument from popular ignorance, or also known as an argument for ignorance. It's a combination, basically, of to quoque and willful ignorance, based on how most others don't understand the topic or the logic behind it, so why should I take the time to learn about it? You essentially build yourself your own straw house of erroneous statements, but refuse to see how easily it's been blown down with by anyone with knowledge on the topic. You could say this could be done by creationists who refuse to learn anything about evolution, for example. So they stay happy in their little bubble of erroneous statements. Or atheists who refuse to learn the philosophy behind morality or beliefs or anything epistemological. The last one of our made-up fallacies is the Wee Willie Winkler. The Wee Willie Winkler, or argumentum ab ego, is an argument from ego. Typically, the person is an egomaniac, possibly brain damaged, and has such an inflated opinion of themselves and their metacognitive abilities, they assume they are always right and everyone disagreeing with them is wrong, and it's everyone else suffering with Dunning-Kruger and not them. The irony is, due to the inflated ego and overestimation of one's abilities, Dunning-Kruger, one misunderstands everything with the most amazing precision, but is so obsessive that one must be right they cannot let the topic go, and they'll flail around searching for anything that backs up their position. They'll operate on confirmation bias, for example, using Urban Dictionary as an authority for definitions, and spend more time speaking in fallacies than Ken Hamwood whilst discussing evolution.
That just sounds like me.
No, different Dave. It was crazy Dave.
I know. I remember the conversation.
So obviously they're a bit of fun. Obviously they're not real fallacies. They're not formal fallacies. They don't really fit any of them. They're sort of a combination of different fallacies. But we just thought we'd, put a few together. And if any of you have any common arguments that you hear like that, any sort of fallacious reasoning that doesn't necessarily fit any of them, or is a combination of a bunch of different things, send them in, because I might add them to an article eventually, and post it just for shits and giggles, really.
Yeah. We tend to do that on occasion.
Yeah. One of my favourite things to do, though, is actually test out headline culture. There's quite often we put in a headline that isn't necessarily misleading, but it might be, for example, I've got an article that I wrote 4 or 5 years ago now called Why Do Christians and Muslims Reject Evolution? Now, if anyone actually clicks the article and reads the first line, it speaks about how some do reject it. Obviously, with titles, you want to keep them short anyway, and that's quite a long title. But you instantly get people answering straight away, no, we don't, and you're just like, you haven't even read the topic that you're responding to. And Dave actually did one with the faith of science, and you can get some fantastic responses. So, I mean, is there a headline culture fallacy out there?
No, it's basically a straw man, isn't it?
It is a straw man, but it's a specific type of straw man. So maybe that's something we need to add to the article ourselves. The headline straw man.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, you're basically, you're not really attacking anybody's argument. You're just attacking a headline. So you're not even arguing against the position. Like a lot of,
understand it.
yeah. I mean, a lot of the time our headlines are sort of questions. So rather than reading the article, we get people answering the question.
Yeah. Without actually, again, taking the time to understand all the thought that's actually gone into it. You quite often have people say, well, I don't click links. I don't read things. And it's like, if it's not explained in the title, then that's not my fault. And it's like,
Yeah, I blame Twitter.
If
the argument doesn't fit in 248 characters, it's not a good argument.
yeah. Really, you want to take something incredibly complex and try and make it that concise? No. I had someone actually request that I basically either copy and paste the entire article into a message or took screenshots of the article and posted it. And I was just like, why don't you just click the link?
Yeah.
And then I did an 11 tweet message giving them the basic idea of it, and it was very, 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 very clear that they still hadn't even read what I wrote there. And they've gone, well, it means this then. I was like, well, no, those last 11 tweets just showed you how it doesn't mean that. But okay, there's no point in continuing from this point, is there? So OP has updated us on the Mott and Bailey. It's a hide the ball where you retreat to a stronger version of the position from the weaker. One can be the Bailey. Is science what? I think that might be a typo, and I'm reading it out word for word. So, for example, science is a social construct, retreating to the Mott, where science is a human activity and humans are social creatures. Fair. I've not actually heard that one before. So there you go, a new fallacy for me. I don't think that's necessarily one for the common fallacies and their uses. But thank you very much, Adam. I'll actually have a look of that one later on and educate myself. And I will drop a link to that one in the show notes once I actually publish this.
Yeah, nice one.
So, I mean, that's basically it for this one. We've covered off a number of common fallacies and their common uses and misuses, both by atheists and theists and of other ontological positions as well. If you have any comments, then please drop them in. We do our best to respond to everyone, although something's wrong with my YouTube notifications, so I do apologize if it takes me a day or two to respond. And yeah, if you've got any that you want to submit for those strange arguments posts that I'm thinking about doing, the made up fallacies post, definitely be up for hearing those as well. They're always entertaining, especially if you can link me to the context of where that actually originated, because sometimes it is just really entertaining to watch these things going on. Especially if you're not involved in it. They can be incredibly frustrating when you're actually involved in the conversation, but really entertaining from afar. So I'm definitely up for seeing some of those.
That's
Um,
why I watch the conversations instead of taking part in them these days.
yeah, I really need to learn to do that. I need to stop spending as much time on Twitter.
Yeah.
In fact, we should just try and get people to just, if someone wants to have a conversation with something about one of our articles or anything like that, contact us and maybe we'll bring you on for an episode. As long as you've got at least some form of sound reasoning, we're not going to necessarily have any old person on here. But
Well, you
yes.
had me on.
Well, you're not far off finishing that dissertation now, are you? Got to be handed in a week or two.
Yeah, no, a week.
Just a week. Blimey.
Yeah, and by next Wednesday at noon.
Oh God. All right.
Yeah.
Should we maybe not do a stream next Tuesday then, so you can.
I
really
wasn't
focus
going
on-
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're probably not going to do a stream until maybe the earliest of next Thursday. We might not do one next Thursday because Dave might do himself in with worry, and
It'll be a celebratory stream.
Awesome.
Years of study, finally done. Have a break and then on to do my PhD.
Sounds awesome. We're also going to be having Ozzy on at some point. He wants to have a discussion with us about New Atheism, how it was originally intended to be used versus how it has transpired to be on the net. So that one will be interesting because obviously there is a lot of the whole dumb new atheists. And we can understand why people are saying that sort of thing because there is an almost tribe-like mentality going on. But that's not necessarily how the term was originally supposed to be used. So we're going to have a discussion with him about that and how some atheists can be ideological, etc.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
Okay.
Been a fan of Ozzy since the Gin and Tonic show.
Really, I haven't seen that one. But he is great. I've watched a few of his on epistemology and stuff like that. He's definitely a very knowledgeable guy. It'd be a pleasure to have him on. So, yeah, very much looking forward to having him on. So I guess that really leads us to the end of today, unless there's anything else you want to say before we go?
No, nothing I can think of. It's been a fun stream.
It has, yeah. So we've done common fallacies and their uses and misuses. You've been listening and watching the Answers in Reason Sci-Fi show. And I'm Joe.
Yeah, I'm Dave, and cheers, Adam.
Good night, all. See you, Opie.
Good night.